Hello.
Hello, everybody. We are really excited about today's episode. And today we are going to be talking about the power of personal narratives and storytelling. This is probably one of my favorite topics. And with that, I'm Katie. And I'm so happy to be here with you all.
And I am Erin, and we are your co-host of the Inner RAE podcast. Before we dive in fully to this episode, I just want to take a moment and update our audience about something exciting that we've been working on. We recently have created some coaching packages, and if you're wondering, what the idea was behind this, we have this curriculum, and by creating these packages, we were able to curate it for 3 very specific types of client. So our packages are Awaken Your Inner RAE, Dating Authentically, and Relational Reset. If you commit to a package, you will get lifetime access to that curriculum. And while we will meet you where you're at, it will also give you a path to keep you moving forward. And the other advantage to hiring us through using a package is you will get about 10 or 15% off our rates. And yeah, it's just a way to feel really committed to the process and keep yourself moving forward, which, living in your inner radiant, authentic energy sounds really great. And sometimes we need a little motivation and commitment to get us where we want to go in life. So that is the intention behind these new packages. You can find them listed on our website, and we'll also include them in the show notes if you want to know more. And you can reach out to Katie or I to hear about which package might most align with you with where you are in your journey today. So
Beautiful.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. Okay. Diving back into our topic, the power of personal narrative and storytelling, I'm going to hand it back over to Katie to kind of talk about why we're talking about this today.
Well, guys, we are constantly telling ourselves stories to make sense of what we're experiencing and what we're going through, whether it's what we're going through in this present moment or things that have happened to us in our past. And so we found the best way to bring to the surface the stories that we're telling ourselves is through storytelling. And that can be through coaching. It can be through telling a story to a friend. It can be through support groups. It can be through talking to your dogs, your pets, your cat. Like, it can be through watching movies or music and understanding the stories you've been telling yourself through these things. And it can also be through writing, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I absolutely love writing. I have been writing since I was a little girl to make sense of my life and what I'm going through. And identifying as a writer has helped me because I've never really stopped myself from writing, other than when I've gone through one period of my life. I really didn't want to bring to the surface some of the pain that I was experiencing. And a lot of stuff within me got stuck in that time period. And I had to go back and rewrite and make sense of the stories I was telling myself, because ultimately not understanding what I was going through was keeping me stuck and keeping me kind of in a self-sabotaging state from being able to move forward in the most authentic way. So with that, when I was in Nashville, Erin and I spent some time sharing with each other some of our writing that we had done to kind of process our past and process different experiences that we've gone through. And it was truly like one of the best experiences because, first of all, it gave me a new window. I mean, I know Erin very well, obviously, but it gave me a new window into Erin's heart and her mind and vice versa. And so it was such a beautiful intimacy space for us. And when Erin finished reading me some of what she wrote, I was like, you need to share this with everybody listening and just give people a space to see into you more deeply. And so that is what we're going to do now, is give Erin a space to share something she wrote, and I will let her tee up what it is she's going to be sharing. But that is context for you all about what we are about to head into. So get comfortable, settle in, and let Erin's beautiful voice and heart and wash over you, because it is a beautiful story and something that I think we all can benefit from listening to. So with that, Erin, take it off.
Oh, thank you, Katie. Yeah, I think I thought a lot about like which of my stories I was going to read on the podcast today. And I think because the topic is the power of storytelling and personal narrative, it's important for me to say, like, first of all, I don't consider myself a writer. Like, that is not my first medium that I would turn to. I am more of a storyteller, more of a like community, like, you know, I like to go to meetings, like to talk to my friends. I like to process with a therapist, a coach. And there is a beauty about pouring myself onto a page and then sharing from that place. So I just wanted to say that for me, while we're so different, I just wanted to bring that up into the audience's mind as like, you don't have to be a writer, quote unquote, or someone who considers himself a writer to benefit from this process. And then the other reason I chose this piece of writing is because if I had written this 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been a very different piece. And I think that that's going to be important to talk about at the end as well.
Definitely.
So this story, the short little story, comes from, I kind of wrote all these short stories in the form of like archetypes, like themes in my life. And it's in a section of this group of writings called The High Functioning Addict. And this is titled Alcohol. Okay, here we go. When I tell people about my relationship with alcohol, I usually start with this. Alcohol saved my life until it turned on me and tried to kill me. So let's start from the beginning. I first met alcohol through my parents. It was a central part of every activity that I can remember, at least when my dad was involved. I knew my dad was a gin drinker, 3 fingers of gin, topped off with tonic and a slice of lime. I knew my mom was either a Scotch drinker, Johnny Walker Red on the Rocks, or a vodka drinker, Grey Goose, martini, very dry and dirty with 2 olives. Every dinner party had wine. Every house guest had a specific beverage associated with them. Every pool party or holiday had some type of seasonal punch or mixed drink. I knew that most wine from France was likely far superior to California wine. I knew that white wine was served chilled and red wine was served room temperature. I knew the difference between a sherry glass, a cognac glass, red or white wine glasses, and a tumbler. I knew that if you used the last ice cubes and didn't refill the ice trays with filtered water, so there was ice ready for cocktail hour, you would be in a lot of trouble. I knew that on Christmas Eve, we left Santa Claus a glass of whiskey, not milk, because he was working really hard to deliver gifts and needed something to warm him up. And I knew all of this before I ever took my first sip of alcohol. When I was 10, I found a bottle of Johnny Walker Red in the bathroom. I sat down on the floor with my back against the clawfoot bathtub and looked at it with contemplation. The bottle itself was very attractive to me. I was curious about it. Why was this bottle in the bathroom? I believe it's because my dad had just returned from Germany and bought it duty-free in the airport on his way home. Hence, it was unpacked with his toiletries and left in the bathroom. I have no idea why I remember that specifically, but that's what I told myself when I saw it in the bathroom. I don't think my parents were home, not that this was unusual. I'm sure that we had some kind of adult supervision, but since moving to Kentucky, it was minimal, and the caretakers were relatively disinterested in me because my brother was the troublemaker and I was the good kid. I knew if I opened the bottle and took a sip, it would likely go unnoticed, as my dad would assume it was my mom, and my mom would assume it was my dad. They were not great at communicating with each other because one was always out of town. I'd already learned that I could tell them one story, or I could tell one of them one story and the other another story and not get caught in a lie. All of these thoughts were going through me. As all of these thoughts were going through me, it seemed like the bottle started to glow. This was going to be the perfect opportunity for me to finally know what all the fuss was about. I stood up and walked towards the bottle. I carefully broke the seal and opened it up. The smell coming through the opening was familiar and comforting. My insides were tingling already. I took a big swig and swallowed quickly. It tasted strange. My first instinct was maybe the bottle was bad or expired, since it reminded me of what really old apple juice that had been sitting in the sun for hours might taste like. As the scotch traveled down my throat and hit my stomach, I felt a wonderful, warm sensation. It was the perfect mixture of euphoria and numbing. I closed the lid on the bottle and sat down on the bathroom floor to relish the sensation. I decided to fully lay down on the floor and allow for this moment to wash over me. I wanted this warmth to spread to every inch of my body. I considered drinking more, but I was enjoying the sensation so much that I wanted to see it through. I did end up taking a few more swigs, however. I wanted to be careful not to drink so much that it would trigger a red flag from an adult. As I laid on the bathroom floor, noticing the details in the intricate tin ceiling and allowing the warmth of the scotch to permeate every cell of my body, I finally understood what all the fuss was about. Life up until that point was very stressful for me. It seemed like no matter how hard I tried, there was always someone or something that prevented me from being able to make everything okay. There was a constant weight on my shoulders. That feeling was almost completely gone in this moment. The sensation I felt from this magical potion made everything seem more manageable. It was the first time in my short life that I understood how I was going to make it until I could leave home and go to college, where I would have more control over my future. In that moment, I made a pledge with myself. Despite many parts of my childhood being blurry and hard to recall, this memory is crystal clear. I was certain, more than I'd ever been certain about anything up into this point in my life, that I was never, ever going to have to do life without alcohol. This would be my saving grace. I had finally found the secret to surviving, and I felt hopeful for the very first time that I was going to make it out. Wow. Even now, I've read it so many times, and I've felt a lot of emotion moving through right there at the end.
Yeah, me too. First of all, thank you for sharing that. Second of all, I'm curious. I'm curious how it felt sharing it again, knowing that there's going to be more people listening to this.
Honestly, I tried not to think about it because before we started the episode, I felt a little nauseated. I'm not going to lie. But what I know for me, whenever I start to feel scared, right, to do something like this, I think about the way, if somebody else were doing this, the ways it has impacted me.
Yes.
And that is what made me brave enough to read this today. And because I know that storytelling, narrative therapy, storytelling, having space to share the truth of how we remember something. And then, for example, when I got sober, I first viewed alcohol as this horrible thing that I was addicted to, right? And through the power of narrative and storytelling, and hear other people who were further along in their recovery journey, I was probably about 5 years sober when it started to occur to me that, like, if I hadn't found alcohol at 10 years old, I probably would have killed myself. And I
Mm.
don't say that to be dramatic, but that is the depth at which I needed relief.
Mm-hmm.
And in that phase of my life, there just wasn't anything else available to me.
Right.
And so by the time I went to write this story, it became the new version of my narrative around
Mm.
alcohol. And it allowed me to fully honor the depth of the loneliness and pain in my inner child,
Mm-hmm.
which is something I've really struggled with because I don't remember a lot of my childhood.
Yeah.
So this story to me represents like the power of what can happen when we are allowed to share our story,
Mm-hmm.
get it out of the darkness and into the light, B, have community of other people telling their story, and being
Mm-hmm.
able to kind of hear like I'm sure I'm not the first person to draw that conclusion that alcohol was first saved my life and then it turned on me. Like, I'm sure I've heard that somewhere else before. And so just by hearing other people who struggle with addiction, like hearing how they've transmuted their story
Mm-hmm.
into being more useful, it helped me do the same. And now hopefully someone listening will maybe have that same transformation, whether it be with alcohol or another self-destructive behavior that really served as a salve or a soothing mechanism at the time when it was first employed or used.
Absolutely. And I think in hearing you share, like, first of all, the way that you write is so beautiful. And it in some ways was like a meditation. I had my eyes closed most of the time. And I think what writing does so beautifully and what you illustrated so beautifully to us is you really paint us a picture of like what your senses were going through, the depth at which you were feeling these different things that move very, very quickly. And you talk about like diving into a crystal clear memory. But I think in you giving yourself the space to write, it became a crystal clear memory and what the truth was at that moment. But a lot of the times, if we don't give ourselves space to tell the story, the memory can seem foggy because we're not actually allowing the truth of the experience to rise to the surface, right? And we tell ourselves negative narratives that
Mm-hmm.
keep us stuck in the loop versus being able to see the wisdom in what we did when we were in this survival mode and just trying to stay alive and trying to process pain the only way that we knew how. Like, we are sponges and we just do with pain what we were taught, or not even taught, what we were shown to do with pain, like you described it. Like, you knew all of this before you took your first sip because it was in your environment. And so I just think it's so so powerful, A, that you shared it, and B, just what writing can do. And I think, unless there's anything kind of more that you want to share.
Well, I think the other thing that I feel like is very powerful is one of my wounds is feeling really misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
so I think that writing can be a way to explore. Let me think how to say this. One of the things I've worked on in therapy in the past is that I can be very curated.
Yep.
And even the title of this story is High Functioning Addict. So,
Mm-hmm.
you read that story and you think, oh, wow, like Erin must have been living in the gutters, a few years later or
Mm.
whatever. But no, what happened was that I used alcohol to relieve myself enough to
Mm-hmm.
build a life that from the outside looked like a very successful life.
Mm-hmm.
And even the way I got sober, I did so many things that I did from the outside looking in. It wouldn't necessarily have represented the depth of the pain or the fullness of my story. And so part of the reason I went back to write some of these things down was so that people could really understand where this came from, because on the
Yeah.
outside I was able to mask and cover up And part of my survival mechanism was to make everything okay. And I speak
Mm-hmm.
about that in the story. Um,
Totally.
I got full rides to 12 colleges. I was on 3 sports teams. I had all of these things on the outside, but like as a 10-year-old, scotch was a salve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like that doesn't line up with what people knew on the outside with me.
Totally.
So I feel like by it, if you're listening and you feel like there is this unsung story or this part of you that is misunderstood or this element of your life, try writing it out,
Yep.
because in this 3 to 5 minute, I don't know how long it took me to read that. I would imagine that, like you, Katie, saying that you knew me, the depth at which you really understand what I was going through as a child. I mean, I could have told you 100 things and not necessarily given you that picture.
Totally. It's like when you allow someone into your world in this way, I mean, you're literally giving someone a chance to walk through the door of your heart into your inner world in a
Mhm.
way that nothing else really can. It's kind of the most vulnerable thing you can do.
Yeah.
Um, but it also then gives me a chance to sit in there with you. And it's
Mhm.
so beautiful. And being able to see you in the light, in that light, is healing for both of us. And also, like, as you were telling the story, it's like I'm getting to rewrite stories in myself, right? It's healing for me in every way. So it's just such a beautiful experience. Um, getting being able to really let someone into your inner world in
Yeah.
this way.
Yeah. Well, and I think the meta of this conversation is my narrative
Mm-hmm.
around not being a writer,
Right.
not being creative,
Mm-hmm.
not being understood.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there's so many layers that I feel like we could pull out and kind of drive home
Totally.
in this episode. And I think that if you're listening to this, just know that the power of looking at your narrative, like what stories are you telling? How are you willing to share them with people? That all of these things are just opportunities
Mm-hmm.
to rewrite the story that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. And get to know yourself better and get to know others better too,
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
I mean, also just like other benefits. I mean, we've talked about how this kind of boosts your creativity. You're able to come up with new ideas, new solutions to problems that you're facing. It helps you improve your self-esteem because it gives your inner world a chance to have an outlet, and it gives you a way of feeling understood when you may be feeling misunderstood. That's been a huge one for me. It increases intimacy, right? Because it allows people to see into your heart and what's going on inside of your head. But it also improves focus because when you sit down and you write, like you are shutting out all other distractions. Now, I will say that when maybe if you have a narrative that you aren't a writer, it which it kind of follows the same narrative, like, oh, I can't meditate. It's like if that's playing out in you, then what I would suggest is creating some sort of challenge for yourself to write 10 minutes a day. Just get out a notebook, a piece of paper, and just write. Just write. It's the same thing that I would say with meditation. Just start where you are. And like ultimately, you'll see that that belief that you're not a writer or like you can't meditate is really just like a negative narrative that's trying to hold you back from what you actually need. Um, to actually relieve stress. So that's another benefit of writing, right? Is it helps you express emotion and relieve stress. And then while you do all of those things, it improves your mental clarity because you're now able to better process information and organize your thoughts, which ultimately then helps you communicate better and be in better relationship with others and with yourself and get really clear on where you're out of alignment, where you're maybe in alignment, where you're not acting authentically, and where you can be more authentic or where you are fully authentic in your life. And all of those things come back to the whole point of Inner RAE in the first place, which is just having A, living from your radiant, authentic energy, but also B, like having more meaningful and impactful and intimate relationships with others and with yourself. So,
yeah. And I think I also just want people to know, like, I didn't start by like writing this, reading it to
right,
Katie, and then bringing it on the
right,
podcast. I mean,
right.
I think I wrote that story originally in like 2021.
Mm,
And it took like many layers of courage. Like, first, I just sent it to like one of my best
yep.
friends who I knew would have like no judgment and is a highly creative person herself. Because I think that's the other thing too, is like one of the things, as someone who has had a story, a narrative around creativity and not being creative, I have sought out a lot of people that do openly express their creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are then cheerleaders for me
Yeah.
along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I shared it with a couple of those friends. And then I found myself in an interesting conversation because I worked in the addiction field. So I might be having like an interesting conversation with a colleague, and I'd be like, hey, I wrote this story about my first drink. Do you want to hear it at like a lunch? And they're like, sure. And then getting this like very real time feedback from people of just watching them feel connected, having them then open up and tell me their story about their first drink,
Mm-hmm.
and just seeing how the layers of being willing to do this thing that is super uncomfortable for me has just led to so much openness, vulnerability, intimacy, and like shared connection with
Mm-hmm.
others.
And it's interesting too, because right, like I said at the beginning, like I've always identified as being a writer. Now, I had no problem reading, things that I wrote about a topic or papers that I wrote for school, but sharing with people my personal stories and my heart. I mean, like I'm sitting on so much writing that I haven't really shared. And that's been my block of like, okay, well, I have all this to share and I haven't shared it. And that's another big step. And I think ultimately why, I mean, I'll touch on this in the end of the episode of just like something that's coming. Yeah, I think creating a space for us to share our stories, to write and to see the light and the beauty in each other and what we're going through is a lot of what the world needs and what we each individually need. And yeah, I think I'm just excited. I'm not going to say much more, but I will say that, yeah, writing to me is like, and I'm curious if you kind of agree with this now, it's kind of like doing the dishes or like doing your laundry. Like it helps you get in touch with the stories that are playing out inside of you, and it gives you the chance to edit them and clean them up. Um, and present them when you feel ready. And so I'm excited that you just shared that with us, and I'm so proud of you. Ooh.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and it leads us into, I'm going to answer our
Yeah.
question.
Yes, Erin.
Do you want to ask
Yeah.
it? Okay.
So name someone in the public eye broadcasting their inner ray, inspiring you to live your most radiant, authentic life.
So in the theme of this topic that we've been talking about, I'm going to mention Elizabeth Gilbert, or Liz Gilbert, because at the time when I was writing this, I was reading her book, Big Magic, that people had told me for years to read. And there was, she just makes all of these really good arguments and cases for why we are all creative, and why living a creative life where we create, and that could be cooking, gardening, building things, drawing, writing, singing, whatever it is, that human beings, if you go back like 100 years ago, we were creating everything around us to live. And so it's really only been in this industrial revolution / now technology revolution that we've been in, that we've lost touch with the fact that we are all inherently creative. And even just like sometimes I have her also, I have it on Audible as well. And when I'm feeling uninspired, I'll just turn it on, because not only is her book about creativity and the magic of it, it's also full of storytelling.
Mm.
And listening to her tell these stories, it's so inspiring. So just listening to her book is part of what motivated me to write some of this down. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think I'm going to be like an author or a writer, because I just discovered this side of myself, but it tapped into a part of me that I guess I just hadn't really thought about, and like kind of shook or melted or dismantled some of this frozen stuckness that I've had
Mhm.
around being someone who creates, and this narrative around someone who doesn't know how to create.
Mm.
So I highly recommend her book, Big Magic. She also has a podcast that I believe is all centered around this topic. So yeah, check out Liz Gilbert.
Mm. Beautiful. I love that. Oh, Erin, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And stay tuned for more podcasts, but also hopefully an offering coming up
Yes.
soon around this topic. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, Katie and I
yeah.
got really excited talking about this, and we have a new offering that will be coming soon,
Yeah.
inspired by this episode. So,
Woo!
all right. See you guys next week.
All right. Bye-bye.